Hello and welcome to this the panel session. I was going to say this afternoon. It's the end of the day for me, but I think it's this morning for a lot of people. So wherever you are, just replace the appropriate time of day so I don't sound daft. So this panel, inside the mind of a hiring manager. We've got some fantastic people here with us today that will introduce themselves in just a moment, and we're really going to be looking at, what is it that gets you that interview? What is it in that interview that gets you either the next interview or the job? But whilst everyone's just introducing themselves here on the panel, please do in the chat say hello, let us know where you are, and of course, what stage are you at in your current kind of job search? Are you actively looking? Have you gone through this and have some things you want to share? There's going to be time at the end for Q&A, so I'll throw the softball questions and then you can come in with the really difficult stuff at the end, at which point I'll just stay very quiet and pretend I'm not here. So let's jump into introductions. My name's Tom and I'm sort of hosting and asking the questions and avoiding any real responsibility. Then Heidi, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, sorry, I was giving a shout out to Cleveland in the chat. I'm also from Cleveland. I work as a customer education manager for a tech company called Pantheon by day, where I've hired instructional designers and other L&D professionals. And I also host an L&D podcast, and I'm pursuing my PhD in instructional design and technology. So I've been around for a little bit, and yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. Joseph, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm from Columbus, Ohio, so not too far from Heidi, 2.5 hours or so. My name's Joe. I'm an independent learning experience designer. I've been doing that for the past couple years, but prior to that, I worked 13 years in a couple different corporate roles. So as far as today is concerned, in those roles, I did a lot of interviewing for various roles. I'm trying to think exactly. It was like 7 or 8 different roles that I did interviews for. And Kara North couldn't be here today, so she asked me to be in her place, which I know are some big shoes to fill. So when I can, I'll try and think of what her perspective might be.
And Gemma.
Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm based in the UK. I'm a digital program manager for an apprenticeship company called the Opportunity Group. I've been in L&D for nearly 12 years now. So I've hired instructional designers. I also look after a marketing department where I am as well. So I've hired quite a few different creative people in my time.
Awesome. So that is the panel. Thanks for everyone jumping in the chat. As I say, there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have got any really great questions, make sure you drop it into the Q&A section and we'll double back to that. But we'll remind you when the time comes up. So first question to the panel then. And we'll kind of see who wants to take it off, who's feeling brave. But I feel that often the first challenge in the whole the hiring process is how do you get that hiring manager, that recruiter's eye to land on your CV, your cover letter or portfolio and think that person is worth speaking to. So when you're in that situation, what are those magic things that you're looking for?
I can go if you like.
Go for it.
I think for me, simple. It's a really simple thing, just to make it as eye-catching as possible. If you show your creative skills in your CV, straight away it's got somebody's eye. I know I've had some CVs quite recently, actually, for a role I was recruiting for, and the more creative they were, the more they caught my eye, because I could see somebody had spent time to tailor their CV to the role that I was recruiting for. So that's definitely a big one for me from a starting point.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Tailoring your resume to the actual job description, or at least providing some kind of a cover letter that addresses those. And I'd add following any directions specified in the job description as well. That's a quick way to rule yourself out, is to miss some specific directions that were given on how to apply or some specifics around that.
Yeah, what both of them said, but also, you know, when I look at resumes, I'm looking for does it fit the role that you're applying for? Sometimes people who are transitioning from another field don't really update their resume or CV with the language of the job that they're applying for, and it looks like you're applying for a teaching position. And so if you haven't kind of highlighted those transferable skills and it looks like it's should be applying to a school district, you know, I'm going to pass for the people who have all of the kind of here's what I can offer as an instructional designer role.
So I think there is sort of two points that I want to dig into a little bit more there. The first sort of was about making your CV eye-catching. So just digging in past that sort of surface level, what are we talking about? Do we want to see crazy fonts all over the shop, Comic Sans headlines, things like that? Or do we want to see a picture of the person on a CV? Does that help? Does that hinder? And I mean, I think things like data visualization stuff has become quite popular. Do you find that helpful, or is that what you're looking for in those sort of more eye-catching CVs, or is there something more specific that you're looking for?
For me specifically, I recognize that with a background in graphic design, I'm biased towards the better looking resumes. So I actually have to stop myself from overjudging in that category. But at the same time, you know, if I'm hiring for an instructional design position, I'm probably hiring for a role that's going to be needing to present information in a digestible way. And if I'm not seeing that somebody can chunk content on their own resume, then that gives me a good indicator that they're not going to be able to do that on the job.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Joe, definitely. And as soon as you said Comic Sans font, Tom, I got a little shudder down my spine. It made me feel quite, so no, nothing like that. I wouldn't want somebody to go over the top and literally throw every creative design technique or anything on their CV, because that is a big put off, I think. But I think just as long as it goes back to tailoring it again to that role that they're applying for, just as long as they're showing that they've got that design technique, and like Joe said, not putting a ton of information into your CV as well. You don't want to sort of give everything up front. You just want to address the details that for the job that you're applying for, because then that's where the interview will come in to sort of pull on those examples a little bit more. I've seen CVs where people just put everything on there, and it kind of doesn't leave much room for conversation when you actually do want to meet that person. But yeah, and just keeping it as relevant as possible is just massively key.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways to keep it relevant is to make sure that you put your portfolio link somewhere on there so that it's easy to find. To everyone's point about not putting everything in the resume itself, at least link out to where everything lives, right?
Yeah.
It's helpful.
I think if that was kind of going to be the follow up in terms of making sort of that tailoring and that relevance and that right language piece. There's obviously a fine line between tailoring for the job that you're applying for and making your skills seem relevant, and ever so slightly twisting the truth. And we've probably all seen examples of both sides of that. Really, really good sort of alignment to what you want, as opposed to this isn't entirely true, but it's close enough, kind of thing. So what level of alignment do you want to see? So for instance, should people be adjusting job titles, or should they just be explaining how it's relevant to the role that they're applying for now? Should people be renaming skills and tasks they've completed, or giving the skills and tasks that they've done in the language they would already use, but then explaining how they align? What do each of you prefer for that kind of thing?
I think anywhere where you're misrepresenting your actual job title is a huge risk. I always tell people not to do that. If you were a teacher, an educator, an adjunct faculty member, do not put instructional designer on your resume, because if my company does a background check on you and they call your previous employer and they ask them, was this person an instructional designer at X school? Your previous employer is going to say no, and you're going to lose out on that job opportunity, right? Because it wasn't your title, right? So definitely don't lie about your title or, about things that you did. But to your point, explain how what you did on the job relates to the job that you're applying for. And remember that recruiters and hiring managers outside of K through 12, outside of know the acronyms, we don't know the language, we don't know the standardized tests, all of those things. So anytime you're talking about metrics or things that you did, you have to really just spell it out.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Heidi said there. It's definitely not a good idea to sort of embellish the roles that you've done or word it in a different way. I think you just need to look at the job spec and look at the pieces that are sort of part of the role and just think about how the activities you've done in a previous role would match up to that. Not necessarily 100% match up to it, but how you can sort of say, well, I've done this in this sort of way. It doesn't have to be 100%, yes, I've done that. But if you can sort of explain it in a good enough way that shows that you've got some of those skills, you're never 100% going to find somebody that's got all of the skills in a job spec that you are recruiting for anyway. But if somebody can sort of explain those skills and show that they have at least, done some of them, that's the best way to do it. I would never embellish what you've done or change job titles to suit a job spec. It's just like Heidi said, it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah, and Heidi said the exact point that I was thinking about. You need to be careful because people can call and verify your previous employment. So the last thing I would say you want to change is your actual job title, and present yourself as something that you weren't. The only thing I'll add is that I think when I'm looking at resumes, I'm recognizing that no resume is really a historical document. It's portrayed to be presenting that person in the best light, and every resume does some degree of embellishment. So when I'm looking at resumes, I'm trying to get a sense of, okay, how much are they exaggerating their accomplishments? And you can kind of get a sense from some things. Other times it's harder, and you need to parse that out in the interview.
Awesome. So yeah, I think that's quite interesting. I've always thought of CVs as almost like a sales document in some ways. It's your your brochure that you might try and hand out. So you've got your CV, you've got your cover letter, you've caught the eye. Let's talk about portfolios. So there's obviously 1,000,001 different ways you could go about creating a portfolio, and it's to an extent it's quite a personal approach. It's going to be a representation of you to everyone that looks at it. But as specifically when you're looking at from a recruitment perspective, what are you looking to see there absolutely should be in a great portfolio?
Well, if Kara North were here, I know she would say anything that you claim you can do on your resume, you should be backing up in your portfolio. I've heard her say that several times.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And I think with the things that you put in your portfolio, it's key that they're yours. So even if you've worked on them as a group, if you haven't actually designed an element of that piece of work, you shouldn't be including it in your personal portfolio. I think that's a big thing. It has to be things that you've designed, that you're responsible for, that you could replicate almost if you needed to show that you've got those skills and you're able to do the design in that way.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go.
All right. I was just going to add along with that. I wouldn't put something in your portfolio that uses some type of visual template that was created by someone else for that exact reason, because it unintentionally perhaps portrays you as being more competent in visual design than you may be.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I was going to say, to explain your process, right? Include something with the project, right? In a bunch of finished projects doesn't give me a lot of sense of what's going to happen before you turn in a finished project on the job, right? What did you do for needs analysis? What did you determine? How did you determine the audience? What steps did you take? How did, one of the best portfolios I've seen, the person put how much time they spent on each project even, and like really told a detailed story about, this is how I did this is how much time I spent. So it really gave you a full picture of their whole process. And then something that I know Kara agrees with me on is like, who are you as a person too? And that's not always common. It depends on the hiring manager, but like, I would love an extra just little tab on your portfolio that just tells me about you as a human being and what you're like and what you value.
So that's really, I think it's really interesting when we talk about this, because so often portfolios are kind of seen as, they're almost hosting sites for pieces of e-learning you've created. So if you were hiring someone and they said, so I've got this, I can either give you completed work, but with very limited understanding of how I got there, or a really detailed explanation of how I got there, but not a link to a working piece of e-learning, and maybe just some screenshots, which would you prefer to see, and what are you going to get out of each that you wouldn't get from the other?
So assuming this is more...
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I keep interrupting. Go ahead.
It's okay. All I was going to say is I think I'd prefer to see, if I was push come to shove, I would like to see how they got to those pieces of work, the detail, because I think that says more about a person, that they can talk you through their design journey. And you can almost get an idea from the visual, just as long as they're explaining to you how they got to that design process, because I think that showcases what they can actually deliver if they can explain that process clearly.
Yeah, what I was going to say is if the role is more e-learning development centric, then I want to see more things in authoring tools, essentially. Screenshots, things like that. I'm not as concerned about walking me through the process, because I can see from the end result how well the process went from the development perspective. If it's instructional design, I would rather see the process and a screenshot, or maybe even no screenshot, from the opposite perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would rather have like a hand sketched storyboard and the whole design process if you're applying for instructional design than just finished products, because one of the biggest skills that isn't talked about on LinkedIn as much as, like the development and the tools and the sexy stuff is just like communication and collaboration, and how important that is in the entirety of the instructional design role. So, knowing that you know how to communicate your ideas and your process is absolutely key.
Yeah. And build a case if you need to for a certain project.
Totally.
So kind of alongside that, I think there is a fairly, when you talk to people, there's a lot of maybe concern about the fact that you must have something storyline in there. You must have something from X, Y, and Z authoring tool in there to stand a chance, or that's what people are looking for. So when you're looking at portfolios, are you focusing on, is it X, Y, and Z authoring tool? Is that something that concerns you at that stage?
I think so, because in the times I've interviewed people, those people would be joining a team, and they would be using the tools that were used on our team, which was usually storyline along with some other things, like perhaps demonstrating a competency with the Adobe Creative Suite, things like that. So depending on what role I was trying to fill, I think I would be looking for specific tools. But just to not go on too much of a tangent, but I think kind of an elephant in the room is, in the past 10 to 15 years, there's been this combination of expectation for roles. Like, it used to be an e-learning developer was one specific skill set that you would find in one person, and then an instructional designer would be completely different. And then you might even have separate like graphic design multimedia people. Somewhere along the way, those two roles merged and those expectations merged. And now we expect everyone to do everything. And it just kind of happened and we don't talk about it.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from with that, Joe, because there is an expectation that everybody can do everything at the moment. But I think if you put it into the job specification that there's a specific tool that that you use where you work, I think the expectation is that you'd want somebody that can almost hit the ground running and be able to use those tools. So it'd be good for them to demonstrate that they can use those tools if that's what you're looking for.
I think there's also some crossover in tools, right? Like if you don't captivate, storyline's not going to be that huge of a hurdle, depending on but or if you've used like some sort of Adobe video editor, you can probably figure out Camtasia. So there is some crossover. But I think like having like an authoring tool, having something where you're creating a video, like using different tools that produce different deliverables is also important.
Because I guess that's maybe the example of you maybe perhaps don't want, and correct me if I'm sort of misunderstanding, but you don't want a portfolio where everything is built in, say, let's use Storyline as an example, because everyone knows Storyline. If you've got 3 or 4 things to put in, all of them are just, I built this in Storyline, I built this in Storyline, I built this in Storyline, would that maybe be less appealing than, say, someone who said, oh, well, I built this in Storyline, but then I built this in Evolve, and I built this in Adapt, and I built this in, I don't know, Premiere Pro, let's say.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see a cross section of tools, I think, because I think you never use just one tool in a design role. So I think it's good to be able to see a cross section of abilities when you showcasing your portfolio and the work that you've done.
Awesome. And I guess now we've kind of talked about the tools. The last kind of thing I wanted to touch on portfolio is it's not always easy to find work to put in there. And therefore there's lots of advice around if you have to create something from scratch, choose something you love, or do talk about your hobby or your passion, or there's the choose a real business problem that you know exists in the world and address that, or explore how you would address that. What kind of things maybe are you more or less happy to see in a portfolio? What demonstrates I guess more relevant skills to you when people are doing stuff about hobbies or things, or whether it's business issues, or does it not make much of a difference?
I don't think it makes much of a difference to me personally. I think just as long as you can showcase your skill set and you can show different ways of designing, I don't think it particularly would matter to me. I don't think I'd think of that when I was looking at a portfolio, perhaps.
Yeah, the main thing is demonstrating a competency with the tool. And so if I was interviewing for a healthcare company, it would be great to see some actual examples from healthcare, but it wouldn't be necessary for me to see that, okay, this person has a grasp of Storyline.
Yeah, the what has never been a deal breaker. And in fact, I usually encourage people to find something that's kind of broadly corporate or broadly higher ed or whatever industry you're going for, because there's a lot of things like soft skills and things that everyone can do that are applicable and someone can see you doing at their organization. But then I always encourage people to do something that they like and are passionate about as well, because then that also gives hiring managers like a way to remember you, right? Like, oh, that's the person that had that e-learning on, like taking care of German Shepherds, or, something really unique and different that helps you stand out.
Awesome. So there was a third topic outside of CVs and portfolios that I thought it would be good to look at from our perspective, and that is social media. So I know, right? Scary stuff. So really the kind of question I wanted to ask here is, how much of a role in your experiences, because I guess everyone's different on this, does it play? Does a really active LinkedIn account actually translate to you as someone you're more likely to get to an interview or to hire? Do really clever L&D related tweets secure a role, or we often talk about like building a profile, right? Social media is all about building your profile. Do you find that does translate to increased hireability or more likely to get an interview?
No. That's just no. To be fair, I know some amazing creative people, like some really top-notch designers, and they have very limited social media presence. And I don't think that hinders your ability. Not everybody is into social media and raising their profiles, so to me personally, it wouldn't put me off hiring somebody at all. I think it's just a personal preference, social media.
Yeah, Bella mentioned in her last session that part of the reason she feels that she was hired onto my team was because of her social media presence and, being active on LinkedIn. And that's true. But also her counterpart, the other ID on my team, has barely any social media footprint, right? So I think it can be helpful for networking and like finding out opportunities exist and like all of the things that come before the actual hiring process. And unfortunately, I think on the other hand, it can also hinder the hiring process because I've seen a lot of job seekers in general complain about the recruiting and hiring process in a way that's really negative towards recruiters and hiring managers on social media. And if I was looking at job candidates and I saw that pattern on their social media, I would be less likely to hire that person. If they're so willing to complain publicly and openly about your company, that's a business risk, right? And so I always just tell people, like, it's okay to be frustrated with the job search. It's okay to be, at your wit's end. We've all been there. Like it's Friday and you're getting all the rejection emails, right? And because that's when they always go out. And it's okay to be upset about that. But when you're like attacking recruiters and hiring managers, people see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, I think it can help. And I agree with Gemma that no social media presence doesn't indicate to me anything negative. If anything, that might tell me that this person just likes to get their work done and doesn't like to goof off on social media. But, when I'm looking at interview candidates, I'm looking for a few things. Obviously, at the foundation, I'm making sure that they can do the job, right? And then after that's established, I want to know two more things. I want to know about their professionalism, like their ability to turn in work on time and all that kind of stuff, be professional, good communicator. And then are they going to be a good fit on the team? And if they do have a social media presence, it can help me to go out and look at their LinkedIn profile, see what kind of posts they're doing, what their activity is, to get a sense of those two things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So I think we're coming up pretty hard on the half an hour, actually, but we have covered all the topics. And I wanted to leave the time for the Q&A as promised at the start. But I think there's been some really, really interesting ones there. And wow, the Q&A is quite full. So we may not get through all of these in 15 minutes. But I will endeavour to keep the questions anyway, gather them together, get answers for any that we don't cover, and share them via maybe the TLDC Slack channel. So let's get started on some of these. So I'm gonna have to move closer to the screen and go all blurry, I'm afraid. So Lisa has asked, is it worth it to have two resumes to make it past the ATS and a more creative looking one? Oh, I see. So like one like plain text one for the automated ATS screenings and a more creative one for the interviewer. Interesting. I have absolutely no experience with ATS systems. I don't think they're that common in the UK, if I'm honest. So And I mean, anything from anyone on the panel about what they think about that.
I actually, that's what I was doing when I was applying for full-time jobs. Was I had a text-based resume and a visual resume, and I put a link to the visual resume at the bottom of the text-based one in case a live person happened to actually view the text-based one, just to get past the ATS systems.
I do have a couple of big opinions about this. Getting past the ATS is a bit of a misnomer. And I have some really great friends in recruiting on my LinkedIn who are like vigilantes trying to dispel this myth that like an ATS is not just like, I don't know who the famous basketball player is, but he's the one that always just smacks the ball out of people's hands on commercials and stuff. Like that's not the ATS. It's not like a robot that just like throws away your resume. It's just a repository. And recruiters are still like mostly required to go in and look at all of the resumes that come in. And what the problem becomes is if you put like a PDF in there and it gets all broken and they can't read it, but it's not like an automated system that is filtering out people. Thank you, Luis. Mutombo, that's the basketball player. The ATS is not Mutombo. People are looking at your resume, but that said, Joe's right that like a text-based one is going to be more easily readable by a recruiter than some of them PDFs. I've seen it in our ATS, like the formatting is wonky and you can't really put all the things together. So I think it is worth it to have two, but just remember that like the ATS is not a robot and it's not hiding your resume from anyone. People are still looking at your resume.
And a quick tip is if you upload your resume to like a job posting site like Taleo or something, and it doesn't auto-populate the fields, like if you upload your resume and then you're having to go in and type things in, that's a good indicator that your resume isn't formatted well for ATS.
Good stuff. Chastity asks, what drives your hiring decision between people who have L&D experience, mostly titles to back up their duties, versus someone who has never held the title?
I think for me, it depends on the role itself that you're hiring for. So in my experience, I've hired for intern roles. So I've got a guy on my team who came on with very little design background. He hadn't had any experience in design. He'd only done it sort of bit of a side project. So I took him on because he showed potential in his design skills. And when we interviewed him and when the little task that we set for him, he showed potential with his design skills. So in that instance, I have taken on people that haven't held L&D experience. But again, I think it just depends on the actual role that you're hiring for. If you wanted to take somebody on that you wanted them to hit the ground running and be quite quick at picking up projects and things like that, then you would need somebody that's got that L&D experience. I think that's just the way I'd hire for those roles.
Yeah, I agree with that. A lot of times for me, it's been about the business need. And so I think that's important to remember is that sometimes as hiring managers, like I think that all of us here would say that we'd prefer, somebody with a willingness to learn who maybe has less experience over a very experienced jerk. At least I would.
Agree.
But sometimes the business need is that we've got this queue of 125 courses that we need to make for whatever, right? And sometimes the time and the business need is just not there to be able to upskill people. So I've been able to hire people that are new to the role and new to ID, but then I've also had to hire people that have a little bit more experience because of like the backlog or the expectations from the business side of things. So I think it just depends. And I think it's important to really look at the job description and have that conversation with the hiring manager when you get to the interview stage.
Yeah, I'll just add that everyone gets their first big break somewhere. Someone had to take a chance on them. So my advice would be give the hiring manager a reason to take a chance on you.
Definitely. Great advice there. Ramina has asked, do certifications from LinkedIn, Coursera, or the many learning academies, and my goodness, there are many, are they of value? Are some better than others? What would you recommend?
This is a can of worms.
We will limit each person to 1 minute of answering on this one.
We're waiting for Kara to weigh in.
Yeah.
Have you seen Kara's Unfiltered ID YouTube channel?
That would be a great place to start, actually.
That would be a great place to start if somebody could link to Kara's YouTube channel. I personally don't think that any one certification is better than the other. What I'm more looking for is whatever your previous role was. Did you look at that role? Did you look at the role you're applying for? Did you look at the gaps? And did you upskill? And how did you do that? So whatever you use to do that, some people just watch YouTube videos, right? Like some people are some people just hang out at places like this, at events like this, and they learn from, some people in the chat were talking about being self-taught on the tools. There's nothing wrong with that. What I do get concerned about is when people post a bunch of like LinkedIn learning certificates with like no context. Like they're just like, I got this certificate. I'm like, okay, but you posted it. So tell us what you learned. Like, tell us what you got out of it. Right. And that's more what I'm concerned with.
Yeah, I'd agree with Heidi on that, definitely. If you've done the certifications, it's good to back it up with what you've actually gained from it, rather than just listing a load of things that you've done, which is great, but yeah, definitely back it up. But again, like Heidi said, there's not one particular one that I would recommend above others. I think everybody, as we all know, everybody learns in a different way. So I'm self-taught. I'm happy to say that. And I think just as long as you can back up your skills, it doesn't really matter.
I think we got away quite lightly on that one. Let's move on. Killing said, I've been advising teachers to change teacher to instructor or educator. Would you say that's okay, or is that problematic too?
I answered this in the chat when Kayleen asked it. I think as long as your supervisor would say like, oh yeah, this person's an educator here, or oh yeah, they're an instructor. As long as the person that we're calling to verify your employment would say yes to that, I think that's fine.
Anyone else on that one, or are we happy with that one?
I'm happy to agree with Heidi on that.
Cool. Christina's asked, some entry-level jobs have kitchen sink ads. Do we tailor our CV in that case, and how do we determine what to focus on? I think we've certainly all seen these job adverts where you must learn every authoring tool that's ever been created and have 10 years experience in software that was launched last month. Yeah, it's certainly tricky. Any initial thoughts from anyone?
I think for me, you can only focus on what you know. I think with those kitchen sink ads, I love that phrase. I think that's a beautiful phrase. I don't think you can tailor your CV because nobody has got every skill under the sun, because otherwise we just wouldn't be hiring all the time if that was the case. But I think as long as you can demonstrate what you can do and some of those tick boxes on that job advert, I think that's enough. Also, I would add though, if somebody is putting that amount of skills on a entry-level job, I wouldn't apply for it because I think the expectations are far too high.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Those are just red flags on so many levels. It could be that the role isn't very well defined. It could be that they're consolidating multiple roles into one. It could be that there's a high expectation of workload. I like to say, I actually do have multiple skill sets, but I can only do one job at a time. So you can expect me to do multiple roles, but I can still only do one role at a time.
Yeah, and sometimes you can take that job posting and copy and paste it into Google and find that it's on like 5 to 7 different entry-level ID job ads. And so it's just something where people don't actually know what they're looking for. So if you're going for your first role as an ID, you want to have that support. You want to have somebody who's going to be able to mentor you and help you to grow. And if you've got somebody who's copying and pasting job postings off of Google, it's probably not going to be a very good, helpful first experience for you anyway.
Awesome. Hopefully, I think we've got just enough time for maybe 2 more questions. And we've got 2 really good ones here. So I only have, Amanda's asked, I only have experience, struggling to read now, with one authoring tool right now, iSpring. Like iSpring. iSpring's a great tool. I haven't seen it mentioned too often in pursuing job postings. How applicable are skills learned in one tool to others? Ooh, tricky.
I don't know, Tom. Maybe you can answer this better. Maybe you've used iSpring a little bit more than me, but I don't think it's that big of a leap to go from iSpring to Storyline. There's probably some gotchas in Storyline that you have to learn the hard way, but I would say if I was a hiring manager and I only saw iSpring, I wouldn't be disappointed. I would just be looking for some indication that this person can pick up the other authoring tools or other tools quickly and has a willingness to learn.
Yeah, if I wasn't sure as well, like I've never used iSpring either. I'm aware of it, but I haven't used it. And I think for me, if I was the hiring manager and I saw that, I'd probably look into iSpring myself and see the difference between the tools that we're advertising for and that. Because like Joe said, there is a lot of crossover with these tools a lot of the time. So yeah, that would be the way I'd look at it.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with iSpring, there's a lot of crossover to Storyline, Captivate. It's the same kind of slide-based, PowerPoint kind of based interface. So you'd probably find you could step over. I would never say with ease because it's Storyline and they go out of their way to make sure it's not easy. But you'll manage. And there's loads of people out there who'll happily sort of give you a hand and help you along the way as well. So definitely don't be afraid to branch out. You've got a solid set of skills if you can use iSpring. And possibly the last question then, because I know we're really up against the time. Are there certain questions you always ask in an interview? Could I just get one from each of you? Because we're a little bit short on time, and I know we probably all got loads that we normally ask. But this would be a good one to finish on.
I'll go first if that's okay. I guess my main question is just is around the willingness to change gear, because especially where I work, it's very fast paced. So I always look for somebody that can adapt to change quite well as well, because it's such a fast paced environment that we work in L&D, especially in design. So that's my question.
Awesome.
So I don't know if they mean from the perspective of hiring manager asking questions or from the interviewee asking questions, but the power question I use when I'm actually being interviewed is at the final question I ask is, based on everything you've seen from my resume, my portfolio, and the time we've had here in the interview, do you have any concerns about me coming into this role? And the response is always very telling. And it kind of gives me an indication of where I am in the process, if I'm going to be moving forward or not. And also, if there are any concerns, it gives me an opportunity to address them. Maybe there was some communication or interpretation of some things that I can clear up.
Awesome.
As a hiring manager, I always ask what their design process was for the last learning experience they created. So if they're not in the field yet, that's something for their portfolio or something for their current role. But it does a couple things. It gives me an insight into their process and how they work, but it also gives me insight into how they communicate about their process and how they're able to explain how they work with others.
Awesome. Well, We've gone 1 minute over, but shh, don't tell anyone. Thank you so much for your questions. I'm going to before they disappear between sessions, I'm going to try and note them all down, and we'll come up with some answers and share them in the Slack group. Thank you, Shani. Thank you to Heidi, Joe, and Gemma for joining the panel. I really appreciate it. Really great insights shared there. And yeah, on with the rest of the day. I know there's a whole day ahead. Whilst I can go off to bed because it's the end of the day on a Friday, so it's time for a nap.
Yes.
But do get in touch with anyone who are on the panel in the Slack group if you'd like to continue the chat or have any more questions. We're eager to help you out.